And in this episode we are going to implement our charts. So a quick recap, in the last episode we were able to handle the fetching of users on the platform, and we also had some quick fixes. So all that has been set in place so that we can have our chart implemented. So without any further ado, let's get onto it and implement our chart. So I've run the server, and as you can see, we are still logged in, even though we set our access token to be 5 minutes, to be valid for 5 minutes. Since our refresh token is set to expire within 365 days, then I guess we can still keep up with being logged in. So what we are going to do basically is to abstract this whole chart screen into a separate component so that we can easily handle things. So back in our code, everything seems to still be okay. And remember, we implemented a simple chart logic at some point. So as a result, we literally have almost all we need to implement this. So here is the socket service. So this one handles every kind of progress we're going to have. Alright, so back to the home page. So we've already abstracted the user lists, and that's what we have here. So what we want to do now is to abstract this chart interface, so we can create a separate component to do that. So chart interface. Alright, so that's the component. Let's quickly have a snippet. Alright, so now we can copy all we have here and push down to the interface. So take note, I copied everything from the main part. So this whole part, so copy this, then replace with this. Alright, now this becomes the chart interface. Alright, so I think that works. So if we go back to the browser, we should see. So we need to import all this. So let's quickly go back to fix those. So we can just copy the ones that are no longer used here. Then also the chart bubble. So we're not using the user avatar. Okay, we're using user avatar as well here. So we're not using the profile model here. Alright, so let's see if it's working now. So user details still missing. Okay, so we made use of the user detail here. However, it's still missing. Okay, I think I get what's going on here. So let's go back to the home. So if you take note, you will see that there was a picture that was missing here at some point. So I think that's what we've missed. So let's get the image in this settings. We can replace it here. So I think this user detail should actually be that settings image. Okay, it was used to the home page. Okay, I'm curious. Let's still have it. Let's remove the chart bubble. Let's check again. Alright, so it looks like everything is back to normal. Yeah, so everything is back to normal, and what we want to do is we want to, whenever we click on a user here, we want to push to our context to alert all the platforms that we have an active user we are chatting with. So we can now display the user information and the messages. Alright, so actually I'm thinking about something. So instead of having the whole of the user interface replaced here, so this is the user interface and this is our home. So what we can actually do is we can bring back the main, so the class main here, and instead just have this as an empty div. So I think that way we can control things better. And what this will actually do will just be to undo getting the active user chat record and actually chatting with the user and nothing else. So we can come back to the home, come down to the chat interface, and put the chat interface within here. Right, so let's confirm that we are still okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create state management for our active users. Okay, active user actually. So we can have this as export const active chat user. Okay, and our active chat user would just be the user information. So this will be active chat user states, and this will be the active chat user itself. So by default it's going to be null. Okay, then as soon as we push content there, we push the user information there. So let's create the reducer for this. So active chat user reducer. So let's go back to the action to add action for this. Active chat user action. Replace them that same here. Right, so we also get the import here. So we've replaced the action type here. So we only need to update the state itself, which is this, and that should be all from the reducers. So we can now go to the store to update this. So we get the active, the chat action reducer, then the active chat action state, active chat state rather. Right, so we have the informations we need. So let's push it once more. So active chat user reducer to the reducer section, and the states to the state section. Right. So that's all set, and what we can do now is we can go back to, so let's save this. So we can go back to our user lists, and that's from where we want to actually click on a user so that we can set the user to be the active user. So let's create a function to do that. So const set active user. Alright, so we will need a dispatch here. So let's quickly get access to that. So const dispatch equals use contests, then we get store. Right, so we have access to that. So set active user. So here we want to get the user data. So let's get it, user data. And now on this user main, that's what we want. That's where we want to have our on click and set the active user. So when we click on the user main, we should be able to get that. So now that depends. So if we go back to the view, okay, we have something to resolve. So attempted import. So we didn't export this. Let's see. So on our reducers, let's take a look at the error again. Active chat user reducer. It was actually exported. I know what it's talking about. So let's check the store. Okay. So let me quickly stop my server and start again. I'm curious. Alright, so it's actually a different error. So failed to compile export active chat states, so equals to null. So that's the wrong part. So to resolve this, let's come back to the reducers. So it should be a colon and not equals to. I think that was the error instead of the import error. Right, so we are back. So yeah, I think we stopped at the user list. So I was going to explain about the user main for the user list. So this is still using the main user main component. So as this. So in this case, this one does not. So this is the one we need to click and actually make it kind of have a cursor that looks like it's clickable. Okay. So we need to like extend the component a little to tell which one is clickable and which one is not. So all we can do is we can come back to the user list, which is where we are. So we can say clickable. So we've defined the component to be clickable. Then next we can now send in an onClick function. So onClick, which is equals to, so we want to actually send the active user, the user we've clicked on, to the set active user function. So set active user into the item. So that will be the active user. So if we now go back to the user main, the components which we have here, now we can extend this class a little bit. So we can literally change this back to the other string that allows you to add variables. I've forgotten the name. So this one I'm changing. Then down here you can now have the variable declaration inside here. So you are checking for a variable here. So you can now say props dot clickable. So add clickable. Okay, that should be still be inside clickable. Then else just return an empty string. Right. So that's all we need to do. And finally, we sent in an onClick function. So let's also undo that. So onClick. So whenever we click this, so props.clickable. So the idea is that if the component is clickable, then it must have an onClick function. So we don't really need to check for the state if it has an onClick function or not. We expect it to have. So we can now say if props.clickable, then props.onClick. So at first let's have it like this. Yeah. So it makes it a function. Then onClick, else none. So else we don't do anything. So instead of else none, let's just have this as a single check. So if not, then it doesn't do anything. Alright, so we've added the clickable class and we've added the function too. So quickly we can come down to the style and set the clickable start class to have a cursor of pointer. So if we go back here, we should have a cursor of pointer for this. However, the other ones should still remain the same. So now if we click on this, we should access the function. Yeah, it looks like it's actually going well. So going back to the code, the user list. So we already got the dispatch. So all we can do is we can, so not the user ID, but the user data, not the ID, the data. So we can now dispatch the type to be the user action. Okay, let's get the action name. So active chat user, active chat user action. Okay, then the payload. So the payload will be the user data. All right. So we don't need the state. Let's remove it. All right, so we've done that, and we've dispatched the active user. So if we go back to the home page, by default, the home page should not show any content. So what I mean is this home page should be blank since there is no active user. So let's quickly resolve that. So home, so let's have access to the active chat user. So we only want to show the chat interface if there is an active chat user, and we are going to actually send this alongside. Okay. So we want to have this within a single system. So const single source of truth active chat user. So let's just use a different name. Active user set active user. So use state, and the default state will be null. Then we can try to create a separate use effect to check for that. So by the way, we can have multiple checks here. So you can decide to let's do that actually. So we can say whenever the user details changes or whenever any other thing changes. So the active chat user in this case. So it seems we have imported something else again. Alright, so whenever the active chat user changes also, then we can have the other if condition for that. So if active user, so like we add for the user detail is not equivalent to active chat user, then we just want to update it. So set active user equals to active chat user, and that's all we want to do. So back to the user interface. So we only want to show this if there is active user. So we can say active user rather. Then we can show the chat interface. Then we send the active user to it. So active user equals to active user. And else we probably want to just display something saying click on the user to start chatting. So let's just have that as a div for now. So div So remember in the user list we added a class to undo this. So no user. So let's just have it like we have here. So we add the class here as well. So no user. Then we say click on a user to start chatting. Right, so that's all we want to do. So let's go back and see if this is working. Alright, so this is where it looks like. So click on the user to start chatting because we currently don't have any user. And if we click on the user, we should get something up. So if we click again, we get a different user. Alright, so since we have access to the active user now, we can come down to the chat interface to replace the user avatar with necessary information. Right, so let's have a state to get information about the active chat user. So we have our props here. Then we have the const active user set active user equals to use state. Alright, so now I want to explain something about what we are doing here. So in the case of the home page, we are checking for So we are checking for a change of props, so more like a prop change in this case to update our single source. However, in the case of the chat interface, it's not a standalone, it's actually a child within the home component. So as a result, any changes that happens here will actually affect the chat interface itself. So what I mean here is that we really don't need to now check if the active user has changed or not. We can remove this and be rest assured that if the active chat user actually changes, then this will change. And moreover, with the way we've implemented this on the home page, we are only going to see this chat interface only if we have the chat user, active chat user. So we really don't need to define a single source of truth in this case. And what we can do here is we can get the information for the active avatar. So let's come down to the user list such that we have here. So let's just copy what we have here. So the caption, so it's not going to be clickable. Okay, so we just copy it here as well. So for the item, this is going to be props dot active user. So let's just replace all the item with props dot active user. All right, so that's done. And if we go back, if you click on the user, we should see the user information. All right, so that's working. So next, what we want to have here is actually when we click here, like we have for this, it should show the user profile, the user information, the complete one. However, you won't be able to edit. So we'll get back to that later. Those will be part of our finishing touches. Then also when you click on this star, you should be able to add the particular user to your favorite user. So the favorite users will show first before other users shows up. All right, so we are going to add those to the cleanups. So now we can now focus on implementing the chat itself. So that we won't really reinvent any wheel. So let's come down to the app.js where we've implemented the other one. So let's come down here. So we have the message, the receiver, the messages, and that's, so let's just copy the message and the messages. So the message is going to be the message we are typing at that point, and the messages will be the messages we've chatted. So let's copy everything and we'll remove the one we don't need. All right, so we don't need this receiver. We already have access to the active user. Right, so message, set message, messages, set messages. So we need use states. So let's get it. Use states. Yeah, I think that's all we need for now. So we will remove this chat bubble and just have one more. Or let's still leave it. We've not gotten there actually. Okay. So on our test area, we want to have the message. So the value is going to be the message. Then the unchange. So we are just changing one thing. So we can just have this directly mapped. So E, we get the event, then set message into e.target .value. Okay. So I think that's all we need actually. I think so. So now on this part, so let's click on the user. So in here, we want this to be a form such that when you are typing, okay, it's not going to work in this case of test area, but we can actually make it work. So we can change this to a normal text box, because if you are using test area, then it makes sense to have it and work the normal enter way. So we can change this to a normal text box such that when you click on enter, we can actually send in our message. So let's quickly do that. So test area, we change to input. So we still have the same placeholder and everything. So let's see how this looks like. So from the look of things, it looks like our active user keeps on just changing, like it's not available every time we reload. So one of the things we can also do is we can push this to the local storage such that whenever we reload, we get the last user we were chatting with. So that would be a little content later. So let's quickly style this. So under the message zone, so let's change this to the input field. And yeah, let's use the height. So the height in this case, so let's say the height is 40 pixels. Yeah, So this looks okay actually. So let's give it a margin a little, margin top of 20 pixel, and let's change it to 550 pixel height. Alright, so I'm okay with this. So we can start typing our message, and when we press enter or we'll click on this, we send in the message. So let's come back to the chat interface. So this will change to a button. So let's have a button and replace with this. Alright, so it's still maintaining the way it is. Alright, so it's not a button. Let's make it a button. Alright, so a lot of things have changed. Alright, so let's quickly style it to the way it should be. So under message zone, the button. So let's find the other button. That we just remove the style we defined on those. So let's copy everything fully. Alright, so the width, we want to unset it. The height should be unset as well. So the border radius is not an issue because we won't have a border at all. Then we won't have a padding also. So the background color should be unset, or rather transparent. Then the color is not required. The border is not, the font weight is not required, and every other thing is okay. So let's see how this looks like now. Alright, so we have our icon back the way it is. Alright, so I think that's okay. So back to the implementation, the chat interface. So we want to change this to a form. Yeah, I actually think it's going to involve everything. So a form, this becomes a form as well. Then the button is going to be a type of submit. Right. So next, we want to have on submit here. On submit. So let's create the submit function. Const submit message. Alright, so that's it. So we now set our submit function here. Alright, so that's done, and I think that's all we need for that. So on submit, we have an event to undo e.prevent default. Then we want to just print out the message. So console log dot message. Right. So let's check this out. So if we click and we type in a message, hello world, and submit, we get our message. So that's it over there. Okay, so let's quickly resolve something. So after logging this, we want to set message to be false. So set message equals to empty string again. So that way we are going to have the message back to being empty. So quick test. Hello. Right. And also if we use the button here to send, it's still going to be the same thing. Right, so that's done. That's done. So the next thing we want to do is, aside from sending the message, is to get the existing messages. So if we go back to the chats, the state management, or rather the app.js, let's see if we fetch user. So I think this is what we did here. So fetch messages. No, actually we didn't fetch any message in this case because we were not connected to the backend here. So I think we can ignore this for now. Oh, okay. So let's quickly implement this actually. So let's get the data and send test socket. So under the set submit message, so the data is going to be this. Then the sender will be the currently logged in user. So for that we need to, so we can either just get the our use context and get the user, or we can get it directly from home. I think that works. So logged user equals to user detail. We have that already. So back in here, we can quickly console log. Okay, we don't have name, so let's just say the sender name would be user. So props dot logged user. So let's confirm the name from home. So logged user. Then dot maybe first name or both of it. Let's just use first name for now. So we will resolve all this later on. Then for the receiver, so in the case of this receiver, is going to be just the receiver ID. So let's get the receiver ID. So receiver equals to props dot active user dot. So by default, the active user is the profile data, but we need the user data itself. So it's going to be active user.user.id. So then the message, so that's the data we are sending to the socket service. And yeah, back to the set message. So set messages. So the existing messages, we are now including this to it. Then the send socket, we don't have this already. So send socket, set test socket. Well, I don't know if this is still the one we are going to use. Probably it's still going to be. Alright, so let's see how this looks like. Now let's still make use of the send test socket actually. So back to the chat interface, this seems to be okay. However, this is just the socket message. It's not going to be saved on our DB. So we actually need that also to complete our process. And before we actually delve into that, so let's make sure the bubbles are set. So under here, let's have fetching. So const fetching. So this will be to handle when we are fetching our messages. Set fetching. So use states. By default is going to be true, but let's leave it false for now because we've not implemented the fetching of messages. So now under the chat area, under the chat area we can have fetching. So when we are fetching, it shows the loading content. So let's say center, enter tag, then the loader. Then when we are done fetching, we want to check if we have messages. So we can say messages dot length is greater than or less than 1. Then we want to show div no message get. So also get the class which is no user also. Let's check. Yeah, no user. And finally, we can now return the messages content. So this can now have this as messages.map into item, and so item and the key, so key. Then we return the chat bubble. So take note, the chat bubble can either be for the sender or for the receiver. So the sender will be the default is the receiver. So we are returning this and we'll specify the key because it's a list, it's an array content. So key equals to key. So now the bubble type, we can decide that based on who the receiver is. So we have the string format here. So let's just have the normal way. So by default, the message content will contain the sender, the receiver, and this will basically be dependent on how it comes back from the backend. So whatever we're going to have now, we might actually have to replace it when we integrate with the backend. So, but for now, the sender is the logged in user first name, the receiver. So in this case, all right, so the bubble type will be dependent on the receiver's ID. So if the receiver's ID is not you, then you are the sender at that point. Else, then you are the receiver. So what we want to do is if, so item dot receiver. So we are getting the ID, the user ID at this point is equivalent to the props dot logged in user, that's logged user dot user dot ID. So if it's equivalent, that means you are the receiver, so empty string, else you are the sender. Okay, so that's what we want to have. So let's take a look at the screen. Let's click on the user. So no message yet. So if I type a message, so hello world, let's see. All right, so I think we got the content we need. However, this is not showing the message itself, and the time is not showing the time. So all those we need to put in place as well. So let's quickly undo those. So our chat bubble will contain the message. So message equals to the item dot message, then the time, which we don't have at this moment, item dot time. Okay, so if we go back to the chat bubble, this message will now be the item dot message. So that's props dot message. So we don't have the time, but let's replace it, props dot time. All right, so that's all. So let's come back, click on the user, start chatting, hello world. So not that. All right, so we got the message, but the time is not displaying because we don't have any time, and we can keep on going. All right, so that's what we have there. So we will complete this in the next episode. I don't really want to go on a very long section. So the next episode we would integrate with the backend and complete this flow. Thanks everyone, and see you in the next one. Bye.